Hi, this is Professor Favors, American Literature, Emily Dickinson, five poems. So we're only going to look at five poems of Emily Dickinson. Of course, there are many more. Some are dealing with her relationship to nature. Others are dealing with her relationship or perception of death. And then the last one is dealing with the contrast between truth. So let's begin. All right, this lecture is subject to fair use. And here's a quick picture of Emily Dickinson and then the introduction. So she was born 1830 and died 1886. Born into an influential and socially prominent New England family in 1830, Emily Dickinson benefited from a level of education and mobility that most of her contemporaries, female and male, could not comprehend. The middle child of Edward Dickinson and Emily Norcross, Dickinson, along with her older brother Austin and younger sister Lavinia, received both an extensive formal education and the informal education that came by way of countless visitors to the family homestead during Edward Dickinson's political career. Contrary to popular depictions of her life, Dickinson did travel outside of Amherst, but ultimately chose to remain at home in the close company of family and friends. An intensely private person, Dickinson exerted almost singular control over the distribution of her poetry during her lifetime. That control, coupled with early portrayals of her as reclusive, has led many readers to assume that Dickinson was a fragile and timid figure whose formal, mysterious, concise, and clever poetry revealed the mind of a writer trapped in the rigid gender confines of the 19th century. Dickinson's poetry displays both her technical proficiency and her embrace of techniques that were new to the 19th century. The selections that follow from Dickinson's most prolific years, 1861 to 1865, illustrate the poet's mastery of the lyric, a short poem that often expresses a single theme, such as the speaker's mood or feeling. So remember, um, the time of 18, 1861 to 1865 is the American Civil War. So let's recap the historical implications and then introduce about two. So again, this is 1819. She was born 1830. So it's always good to look at some years prior to an author's um, um, author's birth. So we have the Panic of 1819, which is a financial crisis. Then we have Thomas Jefferson founding the University of Virginia. 1820, we have some states becoming states, or like Florida becoming a U.S. territory. Then 1826, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams die on the same day. 1829, Andrew Jackson becomes president. Then we have slave debates. We have the first college actually enrolling female students, 1837. So that's 7 years after she's born. We have more states becoming states, and then the Mexican American War. We also have a slave in court case, Dred Scott versus Sanford. 1863 was the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed Southern slaves. Then the Reconstruction era is it begins 1863 to 1877, and President Abraham Lincoln is assassinated 1865. So then we now have the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, the 14th Amendment, which granted citizenship and equal protection under the law. And then now we have the 15th Amendment, which is new to these historical implications. The 15th Amendment actually gave black men the right to vote. which was the 15th Amendment was part of the Reconstruction era. And so, by implication, in the law itself, no racial discrimination in voting suggests that black men had the right to vote. That's in contrast to white women. So then 1865 to 1913, industrial revolutions. By the time of 1886, she was already passed, Emily Dickinson. But it's interesting that in 1920, the 19th Amendment gave women's right to vote, in contrast to the 15th Amendment that gave black men the right to vote. So there's something to think about, because in an era of uh, white patriarchy, an amendment gave the right to vote to black men over white women. So yeah. All right. So Emily Dickinson's view on the Civil War. So the Civil War begins April 12th, 1861. And so she writes, sorrow seems more general than it did, and not the estate of a few persons since the war began. And if the anguish of others helped one with one's own, now would be many medicines. All right, so let's look at her 5 poems. The first one being I taste the liquor never brewed. All right, the 5 poems are as follows. I taste a liquor never brewed. The soul selects her own society. Because I could not stop for death. My life has stood a loaded gun. And tell all the truth, but tell it slant. See the individual videos for exploration of the poems. All right, so this is the end of the presentation. Emily Dickinson resources, there's a whole museum, there's contact information, as well as a um, Emily Dickinson timeline. Thank you very much for listening.